the next segment, we'll be discussing the practicalities of investing and doing business in Uganda. You know, the English philosophical essayist and poet James Allen once made a comment. He said that all achievement was for a time a dream. He said that the oak initially laid in an acorn, and the birds of the air rested initially in eggs, and that in the highest visions of the human soul, that there is a waking giant that is stirring to be let loose. He said dreams are the seedlings of reality, that you will gravitate towards your highest visions or towards your ephemeral wishes, be they base or be they beautiful or be they a combination of both. He then admonished us that we must dream lofty dreams, that as we dream, so shall we become, that our visions are the promise of what we shall one day be, and that our ideals are the prophecies of what we shall at last unveil. Big dreams, big realities. Small dreams, small results. I really want to thank you for your kind attention today. It has been said that your backside can only retain, your mind can only retain as much as your backside is prepared to accommodate. And you've done so well today, and be able to bring you back in again today shows you are enjoying the day's proceedings. And it's been a spirited presentation by the presenters, and we've been so grateful for all that has happened today. Now we come to our final segment of the day. I'd like to introduce yet again members of the high table. We have been introduced to the dynamic Professor Maggie Kigozi, who's doing an excellent job. Let's recognize her again for this last segment. Also, we heard from Mr. John Small this morning, the CEO of the Eastern Africa Association. Let's give him another big hand, who will be moderating this afternoon's event. We also have Mr. Zain Latif. I hope that is you on the high table, sir. I'm assuming that is you. I need to give him a quick introduction. He is the founder and principal of TLG Capital, a firm that focuses on frontier markets in growth capital. TLG Capital has done deals across the sub-Saharan African region, notably in the field of healthcare. Past deals include investing in pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, plant in Uganda, and healthcare facilities in West Africa. Prior to founding TLG Capital, Mr. Latif was an executive director of Goldman Sachs in the new markets division focusing on sub-Saharan Africa across all products. Zain joined Goldman Sachs from Merrill Lynch, where he was involved in originating and executing a number of groundbreaking emerging market transactions in Africa. etc., etc., etc. Highly accomplished. Please make him feel welcome this afternoon. Mr. Zain Latif, yet again. Big, big hand. Okay, and there's a gentleman who's there and I've not been informed. I think, if I remember rightly, that is the minister. Yeah. Is that you, sir? Thank you very much. I think I still have your card here. So that will be Honorable Aggrey Seyoyi Awori, Minister of Information and Communications. Please, let's give him a big hand. And technology. Welcome, sir. So, Mr. Chairman, may I just hand over to you, please, for your discussions to commence. Mr. John Small. Thank you.
And I would just like to, before I call on Zain, to make one or two comments and personal observations. The first in the list there, working with the government. For many, many years, the Western world seemed to think the answer to Africa's problems was aid and debt relief, and that's what they focused on. I remember Tony Blair once saying, double the aid, half the poverty. Well, look what he knew. But I'm delighted to hear from both Maggie in her presentation that the National Development Plan is private sector led, and then we heard from the Minister waxing lyrical that the private sector is king and the customer is king. He was so eloquent, I thought he was going to suggest that they perhaps got married in Uganda, but then I realized that's a no-no, so... But the point is, private sector is what drives development. The governments don't produce anything, they don't grow anything, they don't export anything. That's down to the private sector. And I think I'm delighted that that has become increasingly recognized by African governments in particular. So that's something we must take note of. Their job is to provide an enabling business environment. Sourcing your workforce. When I first established a company in Uganda, it was a big issue to get people with good technical qualifications and 5-6 years of experience. That was 94. A lot has happened since then. A lot of work has gone in, still continuing, but this is a key issue to get technically qualified and experienced people. And I'm delighted now that that is much more easily achievable in Uganda, because it was a key pillar of the development plan. And the people, not just in Uganda, but in East Africa, are absolutely desperate for training, for learning. You find they're like sponges, desperate to move on. And a little anecdote, the day that the Kenya government took over, a new government in 2002, they announced free primary education. There was pictures of young kids all over the country learning under trees, hundreds of them. And the same day in this country, there was a notice, government going to tighten up on truancy. If ever there was a contrast, it was that. People there are desperate, people here perhaps have become very blasé about their education because it's provided for free. So you will find a very willing and able group of people who are very keen to progress. Gaining a return on your investments. Maggie has already talked about some of the highest returns that around in Africa. I was formerly an accountant, and I was once told, profit is an opinion, cash is a fact. And I would urge you when you go in there to remember that. Keep a very good, strict control over your debtors, because credit is something that remains a little bit of a mystery to some of your customers. Prospects for the future and the East African community, I will combine those two with some comments. The Lord Sheikh indicated that peace and prosperity, one of the key things that he looks for. And I know since there was relative peace in southern Sudan, it's become Uganda's, I think, #1 export destination, simply because people, entrepreneurs, can trade. Likewise, Burundi, Rwanda are markets, and Eastern DRC. And that brings me to the East African community. One of my association's big mantras is the development of intra-Africa trade. Too many people focus on the EU with their everything but arms and economic partnership agreements, the US with the AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. I can tell you, when I was trying to export, when I had a major company, it was more difficult to export to Tanzania than it was to Europe because of the non-tariff barriers, because of the bureaucratic controls at the border posts. All these things are increasingly not just being looked at, but are being resolved in order to get your goods and your people across the borders for intra-Africa trade. And it really is very gratifying to, the 130 million East African community. It's not just a theoretical thing anymore, it's actually happening on the ground, and it's one of the great examples for Africa of how freeing up trade, opening up markets, can have win-win benefits for both sides. Tanzania perhaps has been the laggard, and they've now accepted that the principle of freeing up trade and doing which each country is better at to benefit both sides is now really being taken on board. And that's a very important factor for you to consider. Raising finance. Regrettably, Mr. Juma Kisami of the DFCU Bank can't be with us. But what I know is, from my dealings there, is that the commercial banks are desperate for commercial projects. They lend far too much money to the government in government bonds, relatively low rates. They all the time on the lookout for viable commercial projects in order to diversify their portfolios. So in the private sector, money, funding, is rarely the problem. If you've got a good idea, especially in, as somebody said, the global financial crisis didn't really hit East Africa, they're willing and able to finance good projects. Finally, you can hear some of the issues for Uganda. There are certain problems, but one of them that you will hear because of the railway and things, it's landlocked. Well, one of the expressions that I've heard, in fact, yes, it may be landlocked, but it's also land-linked. It's linked to southern Sudan. It's linked to eastern DRC. It's got very strong, it's easier to export from there into Rwanda, Burundi, and also even western Tanzania. So as Maggie's talked about a hub, a regional hub, an IT hub, it's a very valuable point for you to take on board, that they're working very hard to try and develop that away from Kenya being the East African hub. Uganda and Rwanda have certainly got countries further to the west that they can service much more easily than they can from Kenya. So with those very few sort of observations, personal observations, we will broaden out the discussion a bit later on. But I would like to ask Zain to give us a few comments about his personal experiences